The quay hummed with a coarse symphony of labor. The air, thick and humid, carried the mingled scents of pine tar, damp wood, brine, and the sharp tang of recently butchered meat. Sunlight, diffused through the haze of a busy port, glinted off the sweat on a dozen straining backs as they heaved their burdens toward the yawning maw of the awaiting vessel. This was not the sleek, polished deck of a naval frigate, nor the stout lines of a respectable merchantman. This was a pirate ship, reborn, patched, and ready to swallow its crew and their meager world whole. Barrels, stout and unyielding, rolled and thudded across rough planks, their rhythmic percussion a counterpoint to the distant cries of gulls. These weren't empty drums of rum, not yet. These were the more precious cargo, fresh water, drawn from coastal springs, sealed as best as possible. The weight alone spoke of its volume, a temporary abundance, a brief illusion of security before the vast, indifferent ocean. Alongside them, great wooden crates, stenciled with the haphazard marks of various suppliers, held the unyielding fortress of hardtack, flour and water, baked to petrified endurance. And then the meat. Hunks of beef and pork, glistening with a coarse layer of salt, packed tightly into yet more barrels, their contents a promise of protein, a bulwark against the gnawing emptiness of a sea voyage. For a new recruit, perhaps a former merchant sailor or an indentured servant fleeing a brutal master, the sight might have been reassuring. So much food, so many barrels of water. Surely they could not starve or thirst with such a bounty. The land, with its earthy smells, its vibrant markets, its ceaseless flow of fresh provisions, still felt close, its memory a comfort. The concept of sailing on their stomachs was an abstract notion, a turn of phrase for the grizzled veterans, but not a grim prophecy for those who had yet to feel the true, relentless hunger of the open sea. But below decks, where these provisions were being stowed, the illusion began to fray. The hold was a cavernous maw, dark and damp, already tasting of mildew and stagnant air. Each barrel, each crate was wrestled into place, packed tightly against ribs of aged oak, creating a claustrophobic maze of sustenance. The cool, almost metallic dampness permeated everything, a constant adversary to dry biscuit and cured meat. Here, in this cramped, echoing space, the world was reduced to essentials. No longer a bustling port of endless possibility, but a self-contained, finite larder, sealed against the elements, its contents destined for a slow, inevitable decline. Every ration loaded, every drop of water barreled, was a calculated gamble against the horizon, a finite store for an infinite journey. The clatter of the final barrels being lowered resonated not with plenty, but with the quiet ticking of a clock. This initial bounty, however, carried the seeds of its own destruction, none more critical than the liquid gold in those wooden casks. Liquid gold. That's what it felt like in port. But the illusion of pristine water, fresh from a river or well, rarely lasted beyond the harbor entrance. Even the best shore water, drawn from bustling docks, was often already suspect, carrying the microscopic life of a populated land. Once sealed within the rough-hewn oak of the ship's casks, tucked deep in the pitching darkness of the hold, its transformation began, swift and inevitable. The wooden barrels, porous and imperfect, became incubators. Within days, sometimes hours, a subtle shift, a faint, earthy tang. Then the first signs of decay. Greenish algal blooms would coat the inner surfaces, slowly leaching into the precious fluid. Iron hoops, essential for holding the staves together, reacted with the water, imparting a metallic, often bitter taste. Slime began to form, a thin, slick coating that hinted at the deeper putrefaction. The water, once clear, grew cloudy, then murky, a brownish green or sickly yellow. It thickened, its smell turning from fresh earth to something stagnant, almost sewage-like, as if the very depths of the ocean were regurgitating it. To drink this was a torment. Each gulp required an act of will, a suppression of the gag reflex. The taste was a brutal blend of metal, rot, and the faint, sweet decay of unidentifiable organic matter. It brought no relief, only a heavier weight in the stomach, often followed by dysentery or fevers, further dehydrating bodies already struggling. Water, meant for life, became a slow poison. Rationing was inevitable, a cruel daily calculus. A pint, perhaps 2 per man per day, for drinking and cooking. Barely enough to stave off the worst pangs of thirst, certainly not enough to feel truly hydrated. The empty canteen became a symbol of perpetual longing. Men guarded their allowance fiercely, each drop precious. The mere thought of spillage a profound loss. Conversations would turn to water, dreams filled with cool springs and rushing rivers. When the sun beat down relentlessly, baking the deck and turning the air into a shimmering haze, the thirst intensified. Lips would crack and bleed, tongues swell, the throat feeling as if sandpaper had scraped it raw. Headaches hammered behind the eyes, a dull, constant throb that never eased. Irritability simmered, a constant low-level resentment, easily sparked into vicious arguments over the smallest provocation. Fatigue, once attributed to labor, deepened into an overwhelming lassitude, every movement an effort. The body, starved of its most basic need, began to conserve, to shut down, to scream. Only the sky offered a chance of reprieve. During storms, when the heavens opened and the ship was lashed by torrents, every man became a desperate scavenger. Tarpaulins were stretched, sails angled to catch the downpour, buckets and casks placed to capture the fleeting freshness. The sound of rain on the parched deck, a symphony of hope. Drinking pure, clean rainwater, even if just for a moment, was a sensation akin to resurrection, a brief taste of paradise before the silent tyrant of the casks reasserted its dominion. But such storms were unpredictable, their bounty short-lived, and the vast, uncaring ocean often offered nothing but the same brackish, life-sapping liquid. The very substance meant to sustain them was now their slow, agonizing adversary. But even as the water turned putrid, the other vital lifeline, the solid provisions, embarked on their own slow, inevitable journey towards decay. Within the same cramped, airless holds where water festered sat the bedrock of every seaman's sustenance, the ship's biscuit, or hardtack. These were not the flaky, airy crackers of shore. These were brick-hard, square slabs of flour and water, baked until all moisture had vanished, designed purely for endurance, not enjoyment. A man would often need to strike his hardtack against a table or a mast to break it into manageable pieces, each crunch a dull, weary sound, echoing in the mess. Dunked in coffee or brine to soften it, they still retained a stubborn, gritty texture, an abrasive meal that scraped the throat on its way down. And invariably, with time, they hosted an unseen, crawling population. Weevils, tiny black beetles, burrowed into the dry crumbs, their presence a given, a silent, wriggling protein supplement most men learned to ignore, or simply ate in the dark. Then there was the meat, barrels upon barrels of beef and pork, packed and repacked in brine and coarse salt, a stark crimson promise that soon faded to a gray, unappetizing reality. Salt horse, it was called, a grim moniker for the stringy, hyper-salted chunks that were often years old before they ever reached a pirate's plate. To be rendered even vaguely edible, it had to be soaked for hours, sometimes days, in changes of seawater to draw out some of the overwhelming salt, then boiled into oblivion in a communal cauldron. Yet even this didn't guarantee palatability. The fat, often rancid, coated the tongue, the flesh tough and fibrous, requiring incessant chewing, a weary, jaw-aching effort. And as the voyage stretched, so too did the chances of outright putrefaction. Barrels opened to reveal not just gray meat, but a teeming, crawling mass of maggots, a grotesque, squirming testament to decay. A strong stomach, or rather a desperate hunger, was the only antidote. Dried fish, tough and leathery, and hard, often moldy cheese offered small variations, but the theme remained consistent. Grim preservation, fighting a losing battle against the elements. Every meal became a testament to endurance, a battle against taste, texture, and the unsettling knowledge of what lurked within. The smell of the galley, a permanent aroma of boiling salt, rancid fat, and stale provisions, permeated the ship, a constant reminder of the unyielding reality of life at sea. The metallic tang of old meat, the gritty feel of weevil-dusted biscuit, the unyielding effort to chew and swallow. These were the daily bread, the constant companions of every man who sailed beyond the horizon. It was a diet designed for survival, not enjoyment, a stark, unyielding contract with scarcity, day after monotonous day. Yet even these desperate measures of preservation had limits. When the hold's bounty dwindled,
The horizon itself became a hunting ground, a gamble for fleeting freshness.
The crew would cast lines into the vast indifference of the ocean, a quiet patience settling over the ship, broken only by the creak of timber and the sloshing of water against the hull. For hours, men would stare at the unyielding surface, hoping for the slightest tug, the faintest sign of life beneath the waves. An occasional catch, a shark, a few small fish, offered a brief, welcome distraction, a momentary splash of protein that was quickly boiled into a thin broth, its flavor a fleeting ghost against the constant diet of salt and decay. But these were rare gifts, not reliable sustenance. More substantial, yet equally rare, were the landings on isolated specks of land. Islands, often just rocky outcrops shrouded in mist, offered a desperate chance for replenishment. The rush ashore would be urgent, a frenzied search for anything edible, wild fruits, sparse vegetables, or the slow, heavy presence of land turtles, their meat a temporary luxury, their eggs a rare treat. Fresh water, if a spring could be found, tasted like heaven on a parched tongue, a cool, pure sensation alien to the brackish slime in the ship's casks. For a few days, perhaps, the men might know a fragile sense of abundance, a fleeting joy in the crisp bite of something green, the pure taste of unpolluted water. But the ship always sailed on, leaving the brief, vibrant memory behind, plunging back into the monotonous scarcity of the deep. The true, albeit risky, lifeline for sustained existence came from other ships. The sight of a sail on the horizon, once a rare and beautiful spectacle, now ignited a primal hunger, transforming the slow grind of sea life into a surge of desperate adrenaline. The chase was a gamble, a test of seamanship and endurance, fueled by the hope of a hold filled with something more substantial than weevils and brine. When a merchant vessel was finally overhauled, the ensuing chaos was not just about treasure, but about survival. Men swarmed aboard, not merely for coin or silks, but for barrels of untouched provisions, for the promise of fresh water, for whatever foodstuffs the merchant had accumulated. The scramble into the captured hold would be frantic, hands tearing at sacks, smashing open crates, the air thick with the mingled smells of fresh produce, fear from the captives, and the raw desperation of the hungry. Sometimes the loot included livestock, chickens, a pig, offering a fleeting taste of fresh meat before they too were consumed. Yet even this bounty came with its own peril. New provisions, hastily plundered, could harbor unfamiliar diseases, introducing fresh scourges to an already weakened crew. Contaminated water from a foreign port, fruit carrying unseen parasites, or simply the shock of unfamiliar sustenance on a ravaged digestive system could turn a victory into a new kind of misery. It was a trade-off, a constant negotiation with risk, where every gain came with a hidden cost. But the ocean was vast, and prizes were not guaranteed. When even the hunter's gamble failed, when the holds were truly empty, and the promise of fresh provisions evaporated into the burning sun, the true test of endurance began. This was not merely hunger, it was famine at sea, a slow, agonizing descent into desperation's edge. The flesh began to melt from bone, leaving behind gaunt shadows of men. Eyes, once bright with the lure of adventure or the glint of defiance, now sank deep into their sockets, dull and glazed with a constant, weary pain. Limbs, once strong from hauling rope and wielding cutlass, grew thin and fragile, trembling with every effort. Extreme weakness became the norm, making even the simplest task an insurmountable challenge. Every breath felt labored, every step a Herculean feat. Sickness, always a shadow on board, now became a brutal master. Scurvy, that ancient curse of the sea, tightened its grip. Gums bled, teeth loosened and fell, old wounds reopened, weeping putrid fluid. Skin erupted in sores, and joints swelled and ached with a deep, grinding pain, making movement an agony. Dysentery, a relentless internal torment, turned men into hollow shells, their strength draining with every agonizing spasm, their bodies ravaged by constant dehydration and the putrid stench of their own illness. The mind, too, began to unravel under the relentless pressure. Irritability, sharp as a rusted blade, festered into a pervasive paranoia. Whispers of suspicion spread like contagion through the weakened crew. Hope, that vital anchor in the vastness, began to fray, then snap. Dreams were no longer of home or riches, but of cool, clear water, of a feast beyond imagining. Phantom banquets that only intensified the hollow ache of the stomach and the burning in the throat. Delirium took hold of some, their whispers filling the suffocating silence, their glazed eyes seeing things that were not there, speaking to ghosts only they could perceive. Under this crushing weight, the carefully constructed social structures of the ship, once enforced by iron discipline, began to fray. Loyalty eroded, replaced by a raw, primal self-preservation. Mutiny, once a crime, became a desperate consideration, a means to an end for those who still held a flicker of will. Even darker fears stirred in the deepest recesses of the mind, the unthinkable specter of cannibalism. Though rare, perhaps never truly realized on many ships, the fear of it, the knowledge of humanity's darkest capacity under duress, was enough to haunt every man. A horror whispered only in the darkest watches, a line that few would ever truly contemplate crossing, but whose shadow was ever present. The impossible choices loomed. Turn back towards an uncertain capture and hanging, surrender to the elements, or press on to certain doom. This was the true price of the pirate's freedom, a constant, brutal negotiation with hunger, thirst, and the vast, uncaring sea. A stark reminder that beyond the horizon, survival was never guaranteed.